Everybody, Phantom139 here, and I'm back with my thoughts video series. First and foremost, let's get the elephant out of the room. I do apologize for the very long delay between my last video. I know I said there would be a State of Destiny video in December, but I had to end up moving to a new apartment due to me taking a new teaching job. So my time to work on video content has been cut relatively short due to the whole move, and then starting the new teaching job absorbed the other free time that I would have been using to generate content. But now I have a little bit of free time, so I decided to kind of get caught up in terms of my video content just a bit. This is going to be broken into two parts. So today's first video that you're watching right now, this is going to be my feedback on the Witch Queen seasons. So the remaining two seasons that I didn't put reviews out for, so that is Season of Plunder and Season of the Seraph. And then the other video, which will come out probably sometime tomorrow, will be my thoughts on the Lightfall release and where things currently stand. But this video is more so to put my final thoughts on those seasons into the overall record, so at least Bungie has some data points if they are using my feedback to gauge where things were. So we'll start with Season 18, Season of Plunder, and this may have been ages ago, but a final review is still warranted to serve as a point of reference, so let's go ahead and remind everyone what this was. So this was the pirate season, and it was discussed by Bungie ahead of time as a high-paced action thriller season, pirate theming. And while this whole pirate theme statement was true to the end, the season really started to show the whole weakness of what we have come to know as the seasonal model. So let's issue my final ratings for the season here. So Season of Plunder final ratings. We'll jump into the story first. I'm giving a 7 out of 10 for the story. The storyline for Season of Plunder involved Aramis being thawed out by the Witness in order to search for relics of Nezrak. Over the course of the season, we learned more about the history of Mithrax, Spider, and a brand new character, Ido, and the interaction between some of these characters. This story was executed through a weekly rotation involving a 6-player offensive catch crash, a 3-player match-made activity expedition, and then a short mini-mission pirate hideouts, which took place in reprised Lost Sectors. In my opinion, the biggest issue with Season 18 was that the story beats were so short and the activities became so monotonous in nature that it felt like a week in the game was 30 to 45 minutes of new story, and then you had to wait for the next week to get the next bit of progression. And overall, the week-to-week shakeup, there was no real changes at any point during the season. Each week was exactly the same. You do a catch crash, you do an expedition, you run the weekly hideout, listen to a short audio bit, and then you were done for the week. And over time, this made the season feel very dull and repetitive. At the end of the season, there was a short community event in which we had to collect little tokens to revamp the Elixni Quarter. However, this was a very insignificant event, and although the event was designed to be completed over a 2-week period, it was broken in less than 24 hours due to a glitch that once you started to deposit coins, you could amass a high quantity of tokens, and then with the whole deprecation of materials, this basically broke the event that was meant to be occurring over 2 weeks. So again, a glitch that you failed to address during the season led to a downright issue with the whole seasonal model that has plagued multiple seasons now. I will say that some bits of the story were interesting and provided some unique developments, but I just can't help but feel like the overall model just no longer worked for the game, and that story developments and content shifts were so minimal that they were almost meaningless, and they feel like they are stretched out to fit this whole 8-week agenda and then a 1 or 2 week conclusion, and that whole model has started to stale repeatedly. For the end game, I rate 6 out of 10 for Season of Plunder. We returned Kingsfall to Destiny 2, but again, my same feedback for new raid releases is exactly the same. Seems to be falling on deaf ears, but whatever. I'll just keep issuing the feedback. My thoughts are the whole day one thing just needs to go away. We don't need contest mode in the game for raids. Just get rid of it. If you want to have a contest mode, just make it a 3rd difficulty selection, not a version of Master, which again we'll talk about in the video tomorrow, but a 3rd optional difficulty. In terms of the raid itself, it was nice to see Kingsfall back. However, there were a couple of bugs with the challenges where the War Priest's 5-second timer didn't always work correctly. For some occasional reason, Golgoroth's challenge would fail too, even if you were in the pool when transferring the buff, which did lead to some aggravating experiences when you were working on the title for the raid. Now, Bungie did seem to be focusing on one of the major criticism points with adept weapons being completely meaningless, although this does seem to be a Lightfall related issue, and again, my feedback is going to be pre-raid launch, so I can't really hit on this any further. I still think that there needs to be unique adept-only perks for raid weapons, or to make adepts craftable once you obtain a deep sight copy of the adept weapon and you have the original pattern. For Pinnacle RNG, still not a fan of the whole RNG on Pinnacle drops, but looks to be locked in, or it was locked in for the remainder of the year, and no changes would be happening until Lightfall. Again, another thing we'll be talking about tomorrow. For Season of Plunder, the rotation for Grandmasters did move in the direction I was looking for, with a mixed bag of easy, hard, and in between. I really hope that this balance is what's going to be happening going forward. There is another rapidly developing problem with Nightfall weapons having too bloated of a pool to have a good farm opportunity for them, although the new engram farming or engram focusing system that Bungie is introducing with Lightfall seem to address this problem. The artifact mods kind of really continued to fit into the meh category for me, and there was no additional combat mods that were added, and we now see that this was due to the revamp of the mod system. Again, feedback for tomorrow's video. For the grind, I rate Season of Plunder as 5 out of 10, and that's mainly just the whole Pinnacle RNG at this point. I really think that a more deterministic path needed to be the focus, but it's done and done at this point. There were a couple of quality of life improvements to crafting, and additional quality of life improvements came with Lightfall. I can't offer any further suggestions until I actually have some more time to adjust to these new changes. I will start telling Bungie that until they fix the exotic armor hunt with lost sectors, that you're going to start losing points for me on the grind category, because there are so many exotic pieces now that the pools are so bloated and the drop rates are already so low that it's making hunting specific armor pieces completely unfeasible at this point in time. I would rather see overall just exotic armor moved back into quests and world drops, and maybe even bringing glass needles back to the game so you can actually adjust your stat distribution if you get a bad roll, for instance. For the exotics from Season of Plunder, you get a 4 out of 10 here. We had 2 new exotic weapons, one from the season itself and then Touch of Malice from King's Fall. The season exotic was Delicate Tomb, which was a hybrid fusion rifle that made use of the Ionic Trace buff to provide overcharged burst. The weapon was alright, but it felt so much like a niche weapon, and it really is going to be tossed into the bin of a lot of exotic weapons and armor pieces that need a complete rework. Season 19 did have some changes, but they didn't really hit many of the cases I was looking for. Additionally, the continued shift that we had that year where we only had 2 exotics instead of 3 to 5 per season, I really think that was hurting the experience, so I hope the current model of having at least 3 exotics per season is going to be the trend going forward. For the other exotic, we had Touch of Malice, which retained its original last bullet mechanic from D1. It also did add a new feature where you would get a Blight Burst after getting 10 precision hits. The problem, though, is that the weapon, in my opinion, still suffers from the same issues that it did in Destiny 1, where it has a very limited amount of use cases, and this still seems to be the case now. I personally think that the debuff applied by the Blight needs to last longer or enhance damage from all weapons of sorrow, and to increase that factor a little bit. In terms of the other exotics, it was yet again another lackluster Warlock armor piece season. So once again, I've said this before, I'm docking points on bad Warlock exotics. So Fallen Sunstar, neat concept, but given the fact that Arc 3.0 is just in a very bad state for Warlocks, then I can't really say that this is a good exotic armor piece. Of course, Hunters, once again, Bungie's favorite Star Child gets Gryph-Alkin's Hauberk, which granted bonus damage when breaking invisibility and giving you volatile rounds, and then a reserve overshield as well. So it's just another one of those cases where, just slap on all the buffs at once for hunters, Bungie. We can see what your focus is on. I hate to be coy, but it's really time that you start shafting hunters a bit, because you've shafted both warlocks and titans so many times over the past 2.5 years with seasonal exotics, so it's only fair to balance things out a bit. So unless you intend on, doing the right thing and buffing up all of those warlock and titan exotics, then, start issuing, meh hunter exotics. Give them a taste of highly situational use cases for a change. In terms of titans, there was point contact cannon brace, which restored thunderclap melee when killing enemies with thunderclap and then causing lightning strikes when that happened. Given the fact that Arc 3.0 has a lot of issues with crowd killing capabilities, neither benefit of the exotic felt to be occurring on a meaningful timescale to be worth it. So I really think this one needs to be completely reimagined, unless you're going to actually fix Jolt, which, at least in the short term, doesn't seem like a thing that's going to happen. I still think that the argument of using power creep for issuing weak exotics is not the right thing, especially for warlocks. So for the sake of making the game fun and more unique, please ship things hot and then tune them down if needed. Something that feels fun at launch will last a lot longer than something that feels pointless only to get buffed up much later, because at that point builds become so established and entrenched that the new exotics just feel completely worthless. So this is why I personally haven't touched things like Boots of the Assembler, Nothing Manacles, and Rain of Fire. And it would honestly at this point take a complete rework of the exotic to even get me to consider using it over something that is well established at this point in time. For gameplay, I rate 5 out of 10. After last season had a bit of a fall down in terms of the gameplay experience as a whole, this season unfortunately did very little to turn things around and even caused things to slip even further away from where I wanted things to end up being. Arc 3.0 just did not deliver anything I was hoping for in terms of the Warlock rework, and I honestly at this point just couldn't help but see the majority of the 3.0 reworks as take a fundamental Warlock identity, give it to everyone else, and then don't make anything inventive or new. This especially pertained to Jolt, which has led the game to becoming so broken in many things that the enjoyment of most match-made content had evaporated due to competing for kills and PvE activities, and no amount of enemy density adjustments are going to fix it at this point. I think that Jolt as a general verb needs to be completely tuned way down, along with Trinity Ghoul. I personally think that Jolt should only chain lightning between targets that are also jolted, so make multiple targets jolted, and then it can chain. And then at that point, you can actually give one of the Warlock's key identities back by allowing Electrostatic Mind, which right now is an almost useless aspect, to have the original Arc Web behavior back, where Jolt can chain between non-jolted targets as well. The core itself still needs to be renovated. Reputation grinds were so dull in Season 18 that I nearly just dropped it and said I'm not even going to bother. Season 18's Crucible and Gambit grinds were just terrible, and Iron Banner made things feel even worse in some cases. As for the seasonal activities, the triumphs from Season of Plunder were set way too high, especially pertaining to champions, and I honestly am surprised that the 250 champions in Expedition even made it past quality assessment to begin with. That is something that never should have happened. Back in Season of Plunder, we had Festival of the Lost, and it maintained the same flawed event card system from Solstice. In terms of the activities, Haunted Sectors, still very uninventive. We only got one new sector this year, and then to top it off, Bungie failed to fix the timer issue that was present in the previous year after saying they would do so this year. So it was literally evidence of copy and paste. And if that wasn't evidence enough, the spectral page bug that was also happening last year happened this year too. Copy, paste. The title for this event was way too grindy in my opinion. Solstice had 25 Crucible matches. Festival of Lost had 35 Haunted Sectors. Both of these are mind-numbingly long Triumph grinds, and you really need to consider that the longevity of an event activity is not anywhere near as potent as a longevity of a ritual activity. So really, this just felt like another Everbush pushing opportunity, and these really need to stop, especially given the numerous other issues that have been plaguing the game. So for the final rating of Season of Plunder, I give you a 5 out of 10, and unfortunately that means that we had a streak of 3 seasons that were just not good. Season 18 felt like another one of those pre-Beyond Light spring seasons, so Drifter and Worthy, and it just feels like Bungie really wasn't putting their heart into the gameplay side of Season of Plunder, and it really hurted the experience as a whole. While the whole adjusting the game and issuing weekly updates during Season of Plunder was a great thing, there were so many pivotal issues that were bypassed in those updates that they were just becoming meaningless to me. I waited all season to hear about Warlock buffs to both Solar and Arc after how badly they shipped, and we got nothing. And then when we finally did hear about changes that were coming in Season 19, they completely missed the mark with those changes, so I was just at a complete loss for words at that point. So I had just concluded for Season 18 that there was just some kind of flaw in the development pipeline for the seasonal model, and then that flaw was hurting the development as a whole and needed a serious workover. And thankfully, we did get an update saying that the seasons this year would be adjusting that model. So that is the end of the Season of Plunder review. So now let's change gears and look at Season of the Seraph, Season 19, which was the final season of the Witch Queen year. There was a very high expectation for this season after a series of fumbles with the other seasonal releases. So that begs the question, how did the season shake out? So again, we'll go down the list of my ratings. We'll start with the story, and thankfully, things seem to already be looking up in this case. I issue a 9 out of 10 for Season of the Seraph story. The storyline of the season revolved around restoring Rasputin as the Warmind to use the war sats against the encroachment of Ziva Roth, Aramis, and the Witness. We had help from Anna, Elizabeth Ray, Mara, Osiris, and then even for a short span of time, we had Clovis come back. We did restore Rasputin using a piece of Fellwinter a short time period into the season, and of course, it was revealed that Clovis had his own very evil agenda and was deleted from the picture. We then spent the remaining weeks collecting more data to restore Rasputin. Additionally, we were able to gain security clearance to board the Seraph station, where Rasputin's network was located. In that mission, we uploaded a virus to allow a backdoor in, but Aramis eventually found this plan out and shut us out in a calamity event where the war sats were turned against the Traveler. The end of the season event had us destroy the station and showed the Traveler preparing to leave, which led right into the opening of Lightfall. So this time around, the story felt very cohesive, planned out, and it followed through straight to the end. This is what I've been wanting to see all year long, and I'm very glad that we finally got around to having a good seasonal storyline that felt complete. The activities we had this season were a brand new Battlegrounds activity, a 2-part weekly mission, and then a much more in-depth exotic story mission which had campaign-level quality, and the settings and mechanics of that mission were absolutely phenomenal. About the only criticism I can offer was the power cap multiplier on the playlists. I'm not a fan of taking away one of the primary components of the game in any form. Being able to power up and overlevel difficult content is one such aspect of the game, and just by that alone, you can already see where one of my criticisms for Lightfall is going to be in tomorrow's video. In terms of the in-game, I issue a 6 out of 10, so not much of a shift in this category. We did get a new dungeon in the form of Spire of the Watcher. Personally, I think this was a fantastic dungeon experience and definitely the better of the two in my opinion for the Witch Queen year. I know some people were upset that it seemed to be too simple, but they can shove it. In my opinion, not everything in the game needs to be Dark Souls difficulty. A good blend of easy and challenging content makes for a much healthier in-game experience. I will, however, criticize the boss encounters of the dungeon for having way too much health and too short of a damage window to compensate for solo players. Bungie needs to remember that for dungeons, Solo Flawless is one of the biggest proponents of the game now, and having to do 5+ damage cycles on both bosses with a nearly optimized grenade build was not a fun experience. I really want to see more group size scaling of these activities going forward. As for the rest of the game, there really wasn't much of a shift in the in-game. No changes were made to any other activities outside of the usual refresh of champion mods. Still flawed RNG on Pinnacle grinds, which actually hit me in a pretty hard way this season, where I actually didn't hit cap on 2 of my characters until weeks 8 and 9 respectively, and at that point we're 3 weeks away from the end of the season. Unfortunately, the GM rotation skewed a bit back from where I wanted it to be, more difficult. and only 1 or 2 strikes felt like good contenders for farming. I'm just glad that Wendigo landed on Word of Nothing week. That would have been a nightmare if it was on any other week. There were a couple of standouts in the artifact mod category this time in the form of Solo Operative and Weak and Clear. I do appreciate a mod tailored to solo players, and it felt fun to use it on lost sectors and dungeon runs. Weak and Clear, on the other hand, while it was neat with the ammo refresh mechanic, felt meaningless due to the Void Weaken effect still being a 5% debuff. So I think this kind of goes to the heart of me thinking that Void Weaken needs a bit of a bump. For the grind, I can't really talk about anything further. It's identical Season of Plunder. The one thing I will give a point back, though, for is the guaranteed deep sight drops on the reward track. That's something that I appreciated a lot, and I really hope it's something we'll see more of in the future. For Season 19, the exotics, I rate 7 out of 10 this time. We had 3 new exotic weapons, so thankfully we broke the trend of 2. So we had one from the season itself, a second from the dungeon, and then finally a third one, which was from the exotic mission. So the seasonal exotic was the Manticore, which I can literally shorten to Aerial Effectiveness, the gun. This thing was laughable, and honestly, I don't think it ever should have been made. It is a pointless weapon. The exotic mission rewarded us with a pulse rifle Revision 0, which was a very interesting exotic weapon. It was the first weapon of its kind to have multiple catalysts. It had a hybrid firing mode, and even better yet, it was completely craftable. So that was definitely the high point of the season for exotics here. And finally, the exotic from the dungeon was a bow called Hierarchy of Needs. It has a very unique firing mechanism. The only thing I don't really like about it is that the bonus perk where you shoot through the rings and get increased damage only seems to work once you hit a certain range threshold. The perk does say it has a damage buildup, so that seems to be a bug, and I hope it gets fixed. We didn't get any exotic armor, and honestly, as a Warlock main, this is fine because honestly, for seasons, I don't get new exotic armor anyways. So it's nice that the other 2 classes, who main other classes, get a chance to see what it feels like. So a little better on the final score this time around, but don't get your head high about a higher score. It's just because you didn't issue any Warlock or any exotic armor this time around. For gameplay, I give you a 6 out of 10. This season did hit a few strides I was happy about. The triumphs were nowhere near as bad as Season of Plunder, and for the first time since Season of the Splicer, I was actually able to complete all of the triumphs for the season. Reputation grinds started bad at the beginning of the season, but we did eventually get a mid-season patch where the Gambit reputation was doubled. The Iron Banner reputation was significantly increased. However, the bonus reputation was only felt on wins, which when you average it out still didn't really feel great because the game still has terrible matchmaking. There was only a few outliers that were hit in terms of the 3.0 reworks, and I'm still not happy with where Arc and Solar kits are for Warlocks, so I'm still waiting for that to be fixed. For the seasonal event, you get a 6 out of 10, and this is the Dawning. In terms of the seasonal events, I personally think the Dawning is the best of them, because unlike all the other events where a brand new playlist is created specifically for the event and then you are forced to grind the hell out of it until you become numb with boredom, the Dawning instead is a layer on top of the rest of the game. So instead of having to play a specific activity, you just play the game as you normally do, only you're earning currency or ingredients through the game. And then on top of that, they throw in little snowball weapons throughout different parts of the game to spice things up a little bit, make them more fun. So in opinion, it's definitely the best of the events for the year. It still has a couple of flaws. The event card is still something I just want gone. And then the other thing is the RNG on the event weapons was absolutely atrocious. I'm one of those people that bought over 100 pulse rifle rolls looking for a Desperado and Headstone combo. I didn't get a single one. So please, Bungie, fix the perk pool RNG or just make event weapons craftable so we can just make the ones we want. So putting it all together, for season 19, you do get a 7 out of 10, so it was finally the bounce back season that we've been looking for, where after 3 seasons fell flat, we had the end of the year deliver something, and it delivered where it mattered. So the story hit hard, and the game's activities were able to build back up to the level of the story that we got. The messaging of the season was absolutely perfect to convey the upcoming Lightfall expansion, preparing us for the end of the Light and Darkness saga. There were still a couple of points of criticism in the game's season-to-season reset model, so Pinnacle RNG in-game doling out in some spots. But the rest of the game was in a pretty good enough place to hold things up for a pretty decent season of Destiny 2. So there are my thoughts for Season of Plunder and Season of the Seraph, so the last two seasons of Lightfall. So this is today's video. Keep an eye out tomorrow where I'll be talking about Lightfall and some of the issues that it's brought to the game. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.